Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Wendigo horror stories. First story. I think I encountered a Wendigo. My wife and I have been running the rat race for years, with a family, a house in the city, 2 dogs, a cat, the stereotypical American dream. But the city took its toll, the neighborhood got worse, the crime rose, and we found ourselves looking for a way out. Our opportunity came when I was offered a new job out of state. It was a great career move, but we didn't want to move to a new city just to have the same problems again. So we started looking around and found a great mountain community about an hour and a half from the job, and a great ranch-style house with a big back porch, windows everywhere, and a lot of property. The backyard has a big grassy area and a creek that cuts the property in half, then acres of woods beyond. It's huge. The house is more than twice the size of our house in the city. It's all updated and has no neighbors within a mile. It's a radical change from the life we lived in the city. But best of all, it was less than half of what we were paying for our old house. The house was a foreclosure, and when we asked the listing agent about it, she simply said the old family had abandoned the property. We really didn't think anything of it. The first 3 months were uneventful, with us settling into our new life, the kids getting used to the new school and new friends, and most of all, us getting used to the big house and property. But then the weather turned cold and things started to get weird on the property. It started with noises from the back property, things we chalked up to being in the woods. Then the motion lights around the house started going off randomly. Once again, we just chalked it up to being in the woods. But last night, it all changed. Last night was the most terrifying night of my life. One of the dogs was at the back door whining and scratching. I assumed he needed to go to the bathroom, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked out the back door. Instantly, something fell off. The dog bolted for the back property, growling and snarling. It was a cold night, about 30 degrees, but the dog plunged straight into the creek and out the other bank, running off into the woods in the back of the property. Flashlight bouncing, I ran after him, calling his name. I got to the creek and made my way across the makeshift bridge, trying desperately to follow him. I could hear the dog still growling and barking from somewhere up ahead, and I pushed further away from the safety of the house and deeper into the woods. That's when I heard it, a shriek like I've never heard before in my life. It was a mix of a moaning wail and metal on metal. It echoed through the trees and then froze me in my tracks. My dog bounded its way back to me and cowered down behind me. I turned around and could just make out the warm glow of the house behind me and the cold dark ahead of me. I swung my flashlight around wildly, looking for the source of the noise. And that's when I heard an even more terrifying noise. Out of the cold silence, my wife's voice floated all around me. "Babe," the voice called out. I whipped back around and could just barely make out the image of my wife, safely inside our house. The voice called out again. "Babe, I'm right here," came the voice from deeper into the woods. Then came another voice, just as clear as the other. It was my dad's voice. "Come out here," it called. I swung the flashlight around again, and this time caught the briefest glint of light bouncing off of eyes. The creature was in my beam of light for barely a second, but it was tall, maybe 6 feet, and ashen white. It had long, spindly fingers that grasped the trunk of a pine tree, and then it was gone. I turned back and ran toward the house. I ran headlong into the icy creek and stumbled. My dog ran past me, making it back to the yard and up to the porch. I dug my hands into the freezing, muddy bank and pulled myself out, not stopping to look back. When I reached the porch, I scrambled inside. My wife ran over to me, asking what had happened. I just shook my head. I'm not certain myself what happened. I had a growing sense of dread tonight as the sun began to fall. We kept the dogs inside, and I haven't dared to look out the back. But as I sit here typing, one by one, my motion lights in the backyard keep going on. Second story. Something's in the woods of West Virginia. Some of us aren't cut out for city life. Some of us have nervous breakdowns. Some of us lose our jobs and our girlfriends. Some of us. It was a small little cabin out in the West Virginia hills, far away from the city. Just what I thought I wanted. It was originally a vacation cabin for some old couple in New England, but they passed a few years back and the kids have been trying to sell it off. Turns out, not many people are in the market for cabins in the middle of nowhere. Would have guessed, right? It was perfect for me, though, just a little one-bedroom with a living room and a full kitchen in the back. I still had good internet so I could work, and most of all, it was quiet. I could step outside and hear the birds chirping, the wind swishing through the old trees that towered over everything. I thought it was wonderful. The first night was more difficult than I expected. I didn't grow up in the woods, and the forests down in West Virginia are thick, and I mean thick. I walked out on the porch after it got dark. The light from the windows didn't reach far, and everything beyond that was just black shapes. Like a blind person compensating with better hearing, the sounds more than made up for it. The woods in every direction seemed to come alive with noise and sound. Owls, frogs, crickets, toads, all contributing something, all blending together into one long, loud, buzzing noise undercut with the pulsing whine of cicadas. I flipped on the porch light, but it didn't make much of a difference. I could see to the edges of the closest trees, standing like sentinels around the little clearing where the cabin sat. But the darkness passed, I was still just as thorough and complete. I was about to go inside when a little speck of light caught my eye, maybe 100 yards through the trees. It looked like another porch light, just barely visible, and only if I was at the perfect angle. I almost missed it, and if there had been anything else to see in that blackness, I probably would have, but it caught my attention immediately. I didn't know I had a neighbor. The realtor hadn't mentioned it. I don't know if realtors are supposed to mention that, though. Maybe she didn't even know. I thought about it as I got ready for bed and decided to introduce myself the next day. Turns out I didn't have to. I was working on my laptop in the living room when I heard someone tapping on the window that looked out on the porch. "Hi there," the old man said. He had to be pushing 75 at least. The old overalls he wore were stained and frayed and hung off of him badly. His beard was entirely white and almost down to his chest. He wasn't bald, but he wasn't far from it either, with just a few thin strands as white as his beard combed down flat. His face was dark, like it had seen a lot of sun over the years, speckled with freckles and moles and wrinkles, and he walked with an old piece of hickory, wood that he used as a cane. His eyes, though, like the sea on a sunny summer day. It looked like the eyes of someone that laughed a lot. "Hi there," I said, blinking a little because I don't know anyone that taps on people's windows. "Can I help you?" "Well, I hope so. I live just next door." He turned and pointed a shaking finger the same direction as the porch light the night before. "Oh," I said. "Sorry. I didn't know. It's good to meet you, man. I'm Clyde." He nodded a bit, his beard wagging. "Clyde. It's good to meet you, Clyde. I'm Tommy. Figured I ought to come over and introduce myself. Saw you moving in yesterday, but I just couldn't make it over here before dark, and I can't go strutting through the woods after dark anymore." "What? Strong man like you." "Sure you could," I said. A smile split his face, and he started laughing. His teeth were coffee-stained, and he was missing one or two of them. "I think you and I are going to get along just fine," he said. "You want to come in?" I asked him. "I got some beer in the fridge." "Oh, I shouldn't," he said, shaking his head and waving his hand. "It's just one beer. Won't hurt anything." "Well, if you're going to twist my arm, you talked me into it. So how long have you lived here?" I asked. We were both on our second beer, the first two pushed to the side on the kitchen table, right next to the Black Bear salt and pepper shakers that were there when I bought the place. He sat with his cane in front of him, resting his hands on it, drumming his fingers. "Let's see, today's Thursday, so my entire life." He smiled and reached for the beer on the table, then took a small sip with the same smirk on his face. His hands shook a little as he drank. I whistled. "Long time." He laughed and nodded as he set the beer down. "Yeah, a little bit. Used to be lots of people lived out here, though, a long time ago." The sad wistfulness in his voice broke my heart a little. "Really? Oh yeah. Coal mines used to have, probably 200 men or more. That was when I was little, though. A bunch of families lived out here. About all of them's gone now, though. I'm about all that's left. Well, there's Clintwood. Not everyone's gone," I said. Clintwood ain't home, son. It just ain't, he said, shaking his head and sighing. No, I expect once I'm gone, this place probably won't get any attention until some idiot falls down one of the shafts up near the mines and gets killed. He took a swig of beer. He said it so frankly and matter of fact. I couldn't help but laugh. Well, it's the truth, he said, shrugging. I know, but it's just funny how you said it. What moved you out here? He asked, using the beer in his hand to point at me. I tried to think of how to answer that question. I must have been making a face or something, though, because he spoke again before I could answer. Looks like a long story, he said. Yeah. Well, you can tell me another time. Sometimes it takes a bit to get all your thoughts together about stuff. I tried to think of a way to answer that felt, I don't know, right, I guess. He cleared his throat and went on. One of the reasons I came over, though, he said, shifting uncomfortably in his chair, was that I actually wanted to talk to you about that banging last night. Banging? I asked. He held up one of his hands. Now, I don't mean to be that nosy neighbor or that crotchety old man beating on your door or anything. I really don't. Please don't take it that way. I just have a hard time sleeping as is, you understand, and I leaned in to cut him off. What banging? He leaned back and blinked a couple times, surprised. The banging last night went on for like 3 or 4 hours. Sounded like you were over here banging on a piece of wood with a hammer or something. I slowly shook my head. I went to bed last night around 10, Tommy. Slept all night. You weren't over here doing anything? He asked. I looked him in the eye, hoping to show him I wasn't lying. No, honest. He screwed his mouth up and looked down at his feet. And you didn't hear it? I shook my head again, but I was exhausted from moving. I was asleep before my head hit the pillow. What did it sound like? He looked around for a second, then grabbed one of the empty beer bottles. Sort of like he banged the empty bottle on the table gently, making a wooden thunk, 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 and then a pause, and then thunk, 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 but a lot louder. Did you have your TV on? Or maybe your hot water heater was making noise. I asked. Television don't get that loud. The water heater thing could be it, but I swear it sounded like it was coming from over here. He slid the empty bottle back across the table. I shrugged. Sorry, Tommy. I wasn't doing anything. I'll keep an eye out for something to make sure, but other than that, I got nothing. Well, shit. Now I feel like a jackass coming over here and jumping on your case. He tapped his cane on the ground, frustrated. No. Please don't. I'm glad you came over. I didn't even know I had a neighbor till I saw your porch light last night. I'm glad I got to meet you. He smiled. You seem like a good guy, Clyde. I'd love to have you over for dinner sometime. You might have to help me cook, but I make some damn good cornbread and beans if you'd like some. I nodded. I'd love some, Tommy, and I'd love to help you cook. Just tell me when. He nodded and struggled to his feet. I'll do that. He finished his last sip of beer and slid it over to join the other 2 empty bottles. But I need to be heading out. I still got things that need done today. You need anything, though, you come over and tell me. Deal. He held out a wrinkled, old hand that was 95% callous. Deal, I said. We shook. We walked back down the hall to the front door, the old man's cane thumping on the hardwood. You be good, Clyde, he said as he stepped off the porch. I watched him go as he hobbled back through the trees, picking his way under branches and between roots way easier than I could have, even despite the cane. Before I knew it, he was entirely obscured by the woods. I walked back in and took the 3 bottles out to the recycling bin on the porch. I'd hardly touched my second one, but I wasn't really in the mood for it. The thought of weird banging noises out here in the middle of nowhere sort of made my stomach churn a little. But the more I thought over my time spent with the old man, the more I remembered his little jokes and laughing and those laughing blue eyes. I couldn't help but wonder if the old guy was just screwing with me. Dark comes on quicker out here than it did in the city. The sun sinks behind the hills and the shade of the trees deepens and grows until it's one big, shapeless mass that presses in against you. The fireflies blink about for a while, but even they disappear eventually. I was already in bed when it started. I wasn't quite asleep, but I was in bed. The night before had been easier than I was expecting because the moving left me so exhausted, but the second night I wasn't all that tired, and the feeling of being in a new place really began to take hold. The sounds of the dark woods could be heard even through the closed windows, with tonight's melody being sung by the wind and the owls. I think I've been laying there for about an hour when it started. Far away, thunk, thunk, thunk. I don't hear this, I thought. Thunk, thunk, thunk. I don't hear this. Thunk, thunk, thunk. God damn it. I threw the bedsheet off and swung my feet onto the floor. I need a dog, I thought to myself. I padded through the house in my underwear, flicking lights on as I went. Bedroom light, hallway light, living room light, second living room light, porch light. Thunk, thunk, thunk. It sounded like someone was hitting a dead tree with a sledgehammer. I peeked out one of the windows, but I couldn't see anything, so I unlocked the door and stepped out onto the porch. The days were just a little uncomfortably warm for spring, but the nights were still uncomfortably cool, especially with the wind blowing, and it was blowing hard, whipping the trees about with the sound of shifting leaves. I listened, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Nothing. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Nothing. Thunk, thunk, thunk. It sounded like it was coming from the direction of Tommy's house. I craned my neck, trying to see anything, catch a glimpse of his porch light. I finally found the angle, and sure enough, it was there. Maybe it's a Sasquatch, I thought. I had a sudden image of the old man banging his cane against a tree with a mad grin on his face, laughing at scaring me. I thought of walking over there and telling him the joke wasn't working, but then I would have to get dressed and put shoes on. Let the old man have his fun. I turned to go back in the house when I heard a loud hey. The knocking stopped immediately, and so did I. Hey, it said again. It was definitely a woman's voice. It didn't sound really angry or any real kind of way, just loud. Did Tommy have a wife? A wife that was pissed he was out there banging? He didn't say anything about not having one, but I feel like he probably would have mentioned if he did, right? Hey, the voice shouted a third time. I waited for some kind of response or for the knocking to start back, but it didn't. The constant chirps and whines and hoots of the woods were the only sounds. I waited for probably 10 minutes before I went back inside, watching and listening the whole time, but no more sounds ever came. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, when I can't sleep, I remember that decision to just go back inside. I remember it, and I wonder. The next day, when I had a free minute, I decided to walk over and talk to Tommy. I didn't really have a reason, but it was an excuse to take a break from work, so I took it. The woods during the day are quiet, just the wind and the trees mostly with some birdsong thrown in. Even the shade, it was hot and muggy and mosquitoes flew around constantly no matter how much I swatted. It smelled a bit like rain, but the sky overhead was a brilliant blue. I trudged through the trees, picking my way through the roots and poison ivy as best I could, remembering how the old man had hobbled his way through like it was nothing. The old man's house was the opposite of mine in almost every respect. Mine, plopped down in a little clearing by New Englanders, seemed like a foreign invader in comparison to Tommy's. The trees and the underbrush grew up almost right to his front door, with just the tiniest little clearing that held a little ashy fire pit and a couple of chairs. His house looked less like it was built on the land and more like it was grown from it. The walls were river stones fit together with some kind of mortar that looked like mud, and the door was old wood, clearly homemade, but beautifully carved. A single power line ran off from the house to a pole set far out in the trees. It looked exactly like where you would imagine a guy like Tommy to live. Little paths were cut through the undergrowth around the clearing, probably 5, all running off in different directions. When I finally found one, I found it ran right to his front door. I raised my hand to knock, but something stopped me. Giggling. A girl's giggling. I waited for a second, wondering if I had actually heard it all, then raised my hand to knock again. The giggling started again when my fist was millimeters from the door, louder than before. Maybe Tommy does have a wife, I thought. An image of the old man having sex with an equally wrinkled old woman just behind the door ran through my head against my will, and I shuddered at the thought. I dropped my fist and shook my head. I'll come back later, I thought, and turned and picked my way up the path back to the woods, trying my best to stay as quiet as I could. The giggling came a few more times, probably from some open window on the other side, but I ignored it and kept walking, keeping my eyes on my feet, so I didn't trip or move through any poison ivy. Around 7, the clouds started to appear through the leaves overhead, dark purple and angry-looking, threatening storms, and more than happy to deliver on those threats. The wind made the heat a bit more bearable, and the dark clouds took a lot of sting out of it, so I turned off the air conditioner and opened the windows. The thunder started an hour after the clouds blew in, charging the air with electricity and warning everything. Get to cover. Everything quieted beneath the thunder. With the birds and bugs settled in, the only sound between the great booms was that of the wind, blowing the storm closer and bringing the clean smell of ozone. At 11, the rain started, a gentle noise as it beat down steadily. At 12, the banging started. I was watching Mulan on my laptop when I heard it. Mushu had just introduced himself when, beneath the rain, thunk, thunk, thunk. I paused the movie and waited. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Is the old man really out there doing this shit in the rain? Really? I didn't even bother this time. I knew I wouldn't be able to see anything, especially not with the rain. So I was just going to let it keep going. Hey, a voice called. I started a little. It sounded like it was right outside. Hey, it called again. It sounded like Tommy, at least sort of. I set the laptop down beside me and walked outside to the porch. I could see even less tonight than any other night. The beating rain soaked up the light from the porch, so it didn't even reach to the nearest trees. Thunder rumbled overhead. Tommy, I shouted. Hey, he shouted. What are you doing? I yelled. The rain, which seemed so quiet inside, seemed deafeningly loud out on the porch. Come over, he shouted. I looked around, trying to figure out where he was. I couldn't see him, but he didn't sound far away. Where are you? I yelled. Come over, he shouted again. The voice was Tommy's, but there was something wrong with it. Even though it was yelling, it was flat and emotionless in a way that sounded weird and just not normal. Where are you? What are you doing out here? I looked at the place it sounded like his voice was coming from. Hurry. Hurry what? What are you talking about? Hurry, he shouted louder. As my eyes adjusted to staring out at the dark, I thought I could just barely make out Tommy's outline, standing just beyond the reach of the light. Tommy, what are you doing? It's storming. Come over, he shouted back. The light from the porch grasped and reached, trying to illuminate him, but falling just short. All that could be seen was his general shape, barely standing out from the darkness behind him. I strained and squinted, trying to see more to see what he was doing out here, but I couldn't. Lightning split the sky, splashing light across everything for the barest second, and I saw nothing. The lightning rolled again, and I was sure there was nothing there at all. As soon as it went dark again, though, the outline was there again. Come over, it shouted. Hurry, come over. I backed inside and slammed the door, locking it and holding it shut for a second. For a moment, the only sound was the rain. Hurry. I jumped away from the door. The voice sounded like it was directly on the other side. I ran over and slammed the window closed, trying to see what was on the other side of the door. Even in the light, there was nothing there. Still, at the edge of the clearing, I could see Tommy's stooped outline. Hurry, he said. I remembered the other windows and ran through the house, slamming them so hard I was afraid they might shatter. When I shut and locked the last window, I leaned against the wall panting, unsure what to do next. I remembered the landline in the kitchen and ran down the hallway to it, pulling it off the hook and frantically jamming the numbers. Come on, come on, come on, I begged. Please. The line clicked, and someone picked up the other end. Hello. Hello. I'm off Rural Route 67, and I need help. Someone's trying to break into my house. Please send help. Please hurry. Silence. Hello. Hello. The voice on the other end crackled for a moment. Hurry. I slammed the receiver back on the telephone and then ripped the cord from the wall and threw it across the kitchen. The sound of the rain was all I heard now, and somehow that scared me more. I crept back down the hallway, trying to be as quiet as possible, and peeked out of the window. I could still see the shape at the edge of the light. I couldn't make out anything new, but I could see a flash of white. Teeth? It was smiling. Tommy didn't have teeth that white, or even all of them. A knock sounded at the door, but the thing out in the rain didn't move. I moved out of the window and toward the door, expecting it to shatter inward at any moment, thinking it had finally had enough of toying with me. The knock came again, always in threes. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Go! I shouted. Go off. I could see a shadow under the door, moving back and forth like a dog, trying to figure out how to get past something in its way. It went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Then the porch light went out, and the shadow was lost as the darkness outside rushed in, right up to the front door. The night continued like that. It crept slowly around the house all night, tapping on the walls and sometimes whispering, sometimes shouting, "Come over." All the while, the rain beat down outside, and the thunder rang and boomed overhead. It started to get cooler, and when I peeked over the windowsill, I saw from the light of the windows that a fog had clawed its way from the ground to creep about and lay over everything like a funeral shroud. I stayed in the living room, where everything was brightest. Every light in the house was on. I even lit the only candle I had and clutched a little LED flashlight for dear life. I don't know what the light was to it, if it even was anything, but the little flashlight was comforting somehow. At the very least, it seemed not to like it. Once I thought of running, but where would I have gone? The only person nearby that I knew of was Tommy, and either he was part of this sick, awful thing, or it had already gotten to him. I wasn't sure which. It didn't really matter which. At 4, the tapping and the noises stopped. Then the kitchen lights went out. They didn't just go out, but shattered with a sickening crack that echoed through the house as a peal of thunder rolled past. And just like that, half the house was dark. 30 minutes later, the hallway light went out. I was curled in the corner of the living room, the farthest I could get from the door and the hallway both, when I heard a click, just barely louder than the rain, and the hallway light snapped off. My bedroom light, though it was still on, spraying a yellow glow out into the hallway that I could just barely see the edge of. 20 minutes, and it went out too. A loud smashing sound, and the glow was gone. The living room was all that was left. 2 lamps, a candle, and my flashlight. The rain stopped. I waited then in the quiet. I hated the rain, but when it stopped, I wished desperately for it to come back. The quiet was worse. Now I truly felt alone with it, the only sounds being the rumbles of thunder, quieter and farther away each time as the storm receded. The mist and fog, with the rain gone, became nearly impenetrable and pressed against the house, and the windows and the air, already cold, took on a wet and clammy feel. I found myself shivering, but whether from cold or fear, I'm not sure. It started tapping on the wall between the bedroom and the living room. I clicked the flashlight to reassure myself it worked. Thunk, thunk, thunk. It moved back and forth across the wall, almost like someone trying to find a stud. The lamp closest to the hallway flickered, and the light pulsed brightly and a few times before the bulb shattered. I bit my lip to keep from screaming, but the smell of the burning glass and coils made my stomach churn, and I was afraid I might vomit. 10 minutes later, the one beside the couch did the same. All that was left now was the candle, the little flickering flame that danced and sputtered in its little glass holder, making the shadows writhe and wriggle around it. The tapping moved down the bedroom wall and into the hallway, sometimes sounding off the floors, sometimes the walls. It got slower, though, and heavier, closer to the banging I had heard earlier. Thunk, 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 thunk. The last one sounded as if it was just around the corner in the hallway, inches out of sight. "Hurry," it said. The voice wasn't even close to Tommy's anymore. It was a woman's voice, a voice that might have been pleasant if it didn't sound so flat and dead. I wanted to shout at it, but I was too terrified. My voice was gone, fled screaming into the night. I couldn't manage anything more than a shudder. I watched the candle. My whole world became that little dancing flame as I poured every part of my being into trying to will it to stay lit, to keep burning, to not leave me alone. It burned for close to 15 minutes, alone on the table between me and the hallway, between me and it, the fire keeping away the things in the dark the way it has for millions of years. If I could just keep it going until the sun came up, maybe I'd be fine. So I watched it, and I watched it, and I wished and I prayed. Then it slowed, then it sputtered, then it went out. I didn't wait even a second before I clicked the flashlight on and aimed the beam directly at the hallway. The light was dazzling after my time in the dark with the little candle, and the white hue of the LEDs made everything feel colder and lifeless. The tapping didn't stop, or the voices. Hey, come over. Hurry. Hey, come over. Hurry. Hey, come over. Hurry. One right after another, getting faster and faster until they were talking over each other in gibberish, all while the steady rhythm continued just out of sight. Thunk, thunk, thunk. I held that little flashlight out, arms shaking, until the light started to flicker, first once, then twice, more and more until it was a constant flicker like an old movie projector. I tried shaking it and hitting it, but it continued to flicker ever faster, and a shadow appeared on the wall. A black hand, dark as charcoal, pulled its way around the corner, with nails white as bone. It wrapped itself around the opening, gripping it tight. I took a deep breath. Just don't let it hurt, I thought. Just don't let it hurt. A long stream of light cut through the window and splashed against the living room wall. The hand receded back into the darkness of the hallway. As it receded, the flashlight's flickering slowed until it was again a long stream of white light cutting through the dark. I looked away from the hallway for just long enough to peek over the windowsill. In the drive, two circular yellow lights faced the house like great shining eyes. Headlights. I slid the window open with one hand while I kept the flashlight facing the hallway. When it was open enough, I crawled through it as quick as I could, expecting a black hand to wrap around my leg as I pulled myself through. When I cleared it, I ran to the lights, waving my arms and the flashlight, afraid at any moment they might back up and pull away at what must surely look like someone who's gone insane. Instead, more lights came on, blue lights on the top of the car. The driver's side door opened, and a heavy bald man with a 70s porno mustache stepped out. "What are you doing?" he asked. There was no comfort in his voice, just gruff authority, the voice of a bully that found a calling. I tried to explain, but all I managed to do was point back towards my dark little cabin and half say, half shout, "There. Please. It's in there. I help." The lights went out, and it was outside in. The other door opened, and a much younger, much thinner man stepped out. He was pale and tinged a slight green, like he might throw up. He looked at the fat man, who nodded, then came around to me. "You're okay," he said. His voice was trying to be calming, but his hand was shaking and his voice quivered. It wasn't calming. "It's in there," I said. "Okay, let's just sit you down and—" The fat man drew his gun and started walking towards the house. "We can't let him get away," he said. "Backup's on the way," said the thin one. "Just wait. You saw what he did," said the big man. "Stay with him." And he walked off, gun drawn, to the house. The thin cop watched him go with a look of sheer anxiety on his face. We both did. That cop never came out. 2 more squad cars arrived 20 minutes later, right as the gray of morning started to creep in among the fog and the wet mist, then 2 state troopers, then an ambulance. The whole time I sat in the back of the first car, a blanket wrapped around me. The cops all talked in a big group with serious looks on their faces. Every couple of seconds, one of them turned to look at me. The ride to Clintwood was silent. The radio stayed off, and the only sound was that of wet tires on wet asphalt and the hum of the engine. I wrapped the blanket around me tighter as the rain-soaked landscape slid past, dark and depressing. They sat me in a cold, sterile room in the police station under bright LED lights, and left me there until another man came in, a man whose uniform consisted of a yellow tie and khakis with big, thick glasses. He sat down on the other side of the metal table and pulled out a little notepad and mechanical pencil from his shirt pocket. "Hello, Clyde," he said. I nodded at him. "My name is Detective Cooper." I nodded again, and he adjusted his glasses. "Do you know what happened tonight?" he asked. No. Something. I shook my head. Do you know what that something was? He asked, scratching at his notepad. He had it angled up, so I couldn't see what was being written. I shook my head. Is Tommy okay? I asked. Your neighbor? I nodded. He adjusted his glasses again, even though they didn't need adjusting. Nervous habit, I realized. I'm afraid he's dead, said the detective. What happened to him? I asked quietly. He set the notepad face down on the table and looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity, but close enough. Please trust me, Clyde, when I tell you that it's much better for you if you don't know. I looked down at my feet and the blue linoleum. Do you have any idea what happened at all? He asked. I shook my head. I just moved in. Tommy told me he heard banging noises. That's it. He looked at me curiously. Banging noises? Yeah, like what blocks banging together or something. Did you hear them? He asked. At first, no. But then night before last, I heard them while I was in bed. And they came on last night, before everything else. He picked up his notepad and scribbled on it. That was when you called 911, he asked. I nodded, and he kept scribbling. Why did you hang up? I remembered the voice crackling on the other end. Hurry, because I didn't hear anyone on the other end. I thought the line was dead. I lied. If you hadn't hung up, we could have found you sooner. As it was, we went to your neighbor's house first. We thought it was him that called. Why did you come to my house then? His pencil stopped scribbling for a second, and he answered without looking at me. When the officers found him, they thought it might be best to check if you were okay too. His pencil started scribbling again. I'm afraid you aren't allowed to return to your home at present. Due to what happened to Officer Chattery, it's a crime scene. I can't imagine you're too keen to return, though. He looked over his glasses at me, and I shook my head. Is there anywhere we can take you? Or anyone we can contact? My parents live in Tennessee. I can go stay with them. He flipped his notebook closed and put his pencil back into the pocket of his button-up. Probably best to be around family right now anyway. I nodded. Come on, he said, standing up. We'll see how we're going to get you there and get you some coffee. You look cold. We walked out into the hallway of the police station, just as sterile and cold as the room we just came from, and he locked the door behind us. At the end of the hallway, we turned a corner, and Detective Cooper ran right into an harassed-looking young man carrying a stack of files. In the collision, they all dropped to the floor, their contents scattered everywhere. Pictures, documents, forms. I knelt down to help him pick them up, and then I realized what the files were on. The pictures were of Officer Chattery, the large man with a mustache. His eyes were gone, and in their place, severed fingers were stuffed into the sockets, all pointing out toward the camera, while his mouth was open in a silent, horrified scream. I'm staying with my parents now. Have been for a couple of weeks now. My psychiatrist gave me a prescription for Xanax. Honestly don't know what I'd do without it. He suggested I write it all down, said that it helps. I don't know about all that, but he's the doctor, not me. Maybe this can help someone else, I don't know. Could be no one will even read it, but I got nothing better to do. After all, it's not like I sleep anymore. Third story, the austral deer's hands. The incessant hum. God, the hum. I still heard it when I closed my eyes, a persistent echo in my eardrums, like a tiny chainsaw relentlessly running inside my head, all the time. I'd been neck deep in the complex society of Apis mellifera for 8 months, and the initial fascination, the one that drove me to create a dedicated seedbed for studying those golden creatures in their striped suits, had transformed into a kind of mental exhaustion bordering on aversion. Every day was a journey under the microscope, a millimeter-by-millimeter analysis of waggle dances, of pheromones dictating entire lives, of the relentless efficiency of a beehive that before seemed like a miracle of nature and now was a coordinated nightmare. My fingers still felt the sticky residue of honey and propolis, even after hours of scrubbing. The sweet scent, once comforting, had become cloying, almost nauseating. The sight of thousands of tiny bodies moving in unison, each with a specific function, each sacrificing its individuality for the hive, sent shivers down my spine. I no longer saw the wonder of symbiosis. I saw a pulsating mass, a relentless hive mind that had absorbed me and spat me out, exhausted. I needed air. I needed to see something bigger than a stinger, something that wouldn't make me feel like an intruder in a world I dissected to death, especially after what happened during my thesis work, when I started to imagine, or not, I don't know anymore, to have illusions or hallucinations related to the bees. The day I announced my decision to leave bee research, the faces of my lab colleagues were priceless. I remember the look of disbelief from Dr. Elena, my supervisor, who had encouraged me to pursue the Hymenoptera research line during my thesis. "But, Laura," she had said, with a hint of disappointment in her normally serene voice, "you're so good at this. Are you sure it's not just burnout?" I nodded, my brain already disconnected from images of hives and flight patterns. I'd save enough for a couple of months to afford the luxury of floating, of looking for a sign, anything that didn't involve buzzing and the stickiness of wax. Weeks of strange calm followed, rereading books that weren't about ethology, walking through parks without obsessively checking flowers for pollinators. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone vibrated with a call from Clara, a university colleague who now worked in Elena's lab. Her voice, always energetic, sounded charged with excitement. "I've got incredible news for you. Remember Dr. Samuel Vargas? The large mammal guy from university. Well, he called me asking for someone in the field with good experience in behavioral observation, and I recommended you. He needs help with something huge." My pulse quickened. Vargas was a legend in the world of field biology, an expert in Andean fauna. We arranged a video call for the next day. I logged on with a mix of nervousness and a curiosity I hadn't felt in months. Dr. Vargas's face appeared on screen, framed by the clutter of what seemed to be his office, with topographical maps and stacked books. "Thanks for taking my call. Clara spoke very highly of you, of your eye for detail and your patience and observations. I need that, and much more, for a project that's keeping us all awake at night." He told me the details. A recently discovered deer species, Hippocamelus australis, better known as the South American deer, had been sighted in a remote area of Chilean Patagonia, specifically in the fjords and channels of Isen, within the Magellanic subpolar forest ecoregion. We'd never had reports of a Hippocamelus species so large, and in such an unexplored area by humans, he explained. "It's a puzzle, not just because of its size, but because of how elusive they are. It seems they found a perfect refuge among the mist, constant rain, and dense vegetation, where no one had looked before." The project involved an intensive phase of field observation to understand the ecology and behavior of this new population. They wanted to know when their mating season began, how their courtship was, if they had any, the dynamics of interspecific competition among males for reproduction and territory, female behavior during estrus, the gestation period, and if there was any parental care of the offspring. In short, everything a field biologist dreams of unraveling about a species untouched by science. I was fascinated. Fieldwork, nature, immersion in something completely new and tangible, far from the glass cell of insects. It was the perfect opportunity. Although my experience with large mammals was limited, Dr. Vargas assured me I'd have time to review the preliminary material they had managed to collect: blurry photographs, vocalization recordings, and some trail camera data. He also encouraged me to familiarize myself, on my own, with the dynamics of other deer species in the region, such as the pudu, pudu puda, or the southern hummel, Hippocamelus bisulcus, to have a comparative basis. I would need a frame of reference, normal, that would allow me to identify the unusual. I accepted without hesitation. The bee-induced exhaustion still weighed on me, but the prospect of delving into a subpolar forest, tracking a ghost deer, and unraveling its secrets was the perfect antidote. With the contract signed and enthusiasm eroding my last reserves of bee aversion, I immersed myself in the vast bibliography on cervids. My goal was clear: build a foundation of normality so that any deviation in the behavior of the South American deer would stand out. The following weeks passed among scientific articles, documentary videos, and dusty monographs, familiarizing myself with the world of Patagonian deer. I learned about the southern huemul, the region's most emblematic native deer. They are medium-sized animals, with dense fur ranging from brown to gray, perfectly adapted to the cold and humidity. They are primarily diurnal, though sometimes seen at dawn and dusk. Their diet is varied, including shrubs, lichens, and grasses. They usually live in small family groups or solitarily, making each sighting precious. Dominance displays in males during rutting season are fascinating. Deep growls, the clashing of their antlers in ritualized combat that rarely ends in serious injury, rather in a display of strength and endurance. Dominant males mark their territory by rubbing their antlers against trees and releasing pheromones. Females, for their part, observe and choose the male who proves to be the strongest and most suitable for reproduction, a process that seems more like a power parade than an intimate courtship. Parental care, while it exists, is relatively brief, with offspring following the mother for a few months before becoming more independent. Everything about them radiated the brutal but predictable logic of survival. But then I moved on to Dr. Vardis's folders on the Hippocamelus australis, the South American deer, the new species. The photos were blurry, grainy, taken from a distance by trail cameras or with high-powered telephoto lenses. Still, the difference was striking. Most of the captured specimens were significantly larger than any known huemul, almost double in some cases, with more robust musculature. Their fur, instead of the typical brownish or grayish tone, appeared a deep jet black, almost absorbent, making them disappear into the gloom of the cloud forest. Others, however, appeared a ghostly pale white, almost translucent. Two fur tones, by age perhaps, a type of sexual dimorphism between males and females. The male's antlers were thicker and had stranger ramifications than those of common huemuls. The trail camera recordings, though sparse, were the most unsettling. They didn't show typical cervid movement patterns. There was no light trot, no nervous flight upon detecting the sensor. Instead, there were slow, deliberate, almost paused movements, as if they were inspecting the surroundings with unusual curiosity. In one sequence, a dark-furred specimen remained completely motionless in front of the camera for several minutes, head held high, eyes, two bright points in the darkness, fixed on the lens. In another, a group of 4 individuals, 1 black and 3 white, moved in a strange, almost linear formation, instead of the typical dispersion of a herd. There was no grazing, no evidence of feeding, just movement and observation. My ethological normal began to waver even before I set foot in Patagonia. These creatures, with their anomalous size and extreme bicolor fur, were already a contradiction to the norms of their own group. But the strangest things are those images, those flashes of something distinct in their eyes, in their movements. A stillness too conscious, an organization too deliberate. But, well, at that time it was a newly discovered group. And in nature, there will always be some group that doesn't follow the norm. The departure was a blur of logistics and nervousness. The bee-induced exhaustion was still a backdrop, but the excitement of the unknown pushed it into the background. My team, composed of 2 field biologists with mammal experience, though unfamiliar with huemuls, joined me. Andres, a young and enthusiastic ethologist, and Sophia, an experienced Chilean botanist with an encyclopedic knowledge of local flora and a keen eye for detail. We met at the Santiago airport, exchanging tired smiles and suitcases packed with technical gear and thermal clothing. The flight to Coyhaique and then the endless drive along gravel roads, winding through dense vegetation and fjords, was a gradual immersion into the isolation we would be submerged in for the next few months. The research center was nothing more than a handful of rustic wooden cabins, precariously nestled between the dark green of the trees and the dull gray of the mountains. The fine, persistent rain was a constant welcome, enveloping everything in an ethereal mist that gave the landscape a spectral air. The air smelled of wet earth, moss, and the cold dampness of wood. The silence was profound, broken only by the incessant dripping and the whisper of the wind through the coigs and arraigns. There was no trace of civilization beyond a couple of fishing boats anchored at a small makeshift dock. We were truly at the end of the world. The first week was a frantic dance of acclimatization and planning. With the help of a couple of local guides, men of few words but with eyes that seemed to have seen every tree and every stream, we conducted an initial reconnaissance of the total area assigned for the research. The terrain was challenging. Almost non-existent trails, steep slopes, treacherous bogs, and vegetation so dense that sunlight barely filtered to the ground. We consulted topographic maps, marking key points, possible animal movement routes, water sources, refuge areas, and potential elevated observation points. We decided to divide the area into 3 work fronts, each covering a specific sector to maximize our chances of sighting and monitoring. The idea was to rotate observation areas every few days to keep the perspective fresh and reduce impact. The most important task of that first week was the strategic distribution of trail cameras. We walked kilometers carrying the equipment and attaching it to robust trees. We wanted to capture any movement. We calibrated the motion sensors for medium-large detection, not for small animals. We knew that the South American deer were substantially larger than common mules, and the idea was to focus on them. We didn't want thousands of photos of rabbits or foxes. It was a measure to optimize storage and review time, but also implicitly to focus on the anomaly we expected to find. At dusk, back in the cabins, the only light came from a wood-burning stove and a couple of gas lamps. As the rain hammered on the roof, we reviewed coordinates, discussed the best access routes for the coming days, and shared our first impressions of the forest. Andres was fascinated by the abundance of lichens, Sophia by the native orchids timidly peeking out from the moss, and I felt the weight of the silence, the immensity of an untouched place that held secrets. We hadn't seen a single South American deer in person yet, but the feeling that we were treading on different ground, a place where the unusual was the norm, was already beginning to settle in. The second week marked the formal start of our field operations. We had divided the terrain, with Andres covering the western sector, an area of deep valleys and dense thickets, ideal for camouflage. Sophia took charge of the east, characterized by its gentler slopes and proximity to a couple of small streams that flowed into the fjord. I was assigned the central zone, a labyrinth of primary, dense, and ancient forest, dotted with rock outcrops and small wetlands. Communication between us was limited to satellite radios, which, despite their reliability, often cut out with the capricious Patagonian weather, forcing us to rely on daily meeting points and the good faith that everyone followed their protocols. The first week of observation was, to put it mildly, frustrating. We tracked, we waited, we blended into the landscape, but the South American deer, Hippocamelus australis, seemed like ghosts. We saw everything else, curious foxes, flocks of birds, even a poodoo that scurried through the undergrowth. Everything, except the deer for which we had traveled thousands of kilometers. It was normal. Large, elusive animals require patience. Even so, the disappointment was palpable in Andres's and Sophia's eyes at the end of each day. Physical exhaustion was constant, a cold dampness that seeped into your bones, and the frustration of searching for something that wouldn't show itself. The following weeks established a routine. Mornings of exploration, observation, and trail camera maintenance. Afternoons of data recording, and nights of planning. We rotated fronts every 7 days, which allowed all three of us to familiarize ourselves with the entire study area. We learned to navigate the treacherous terrain, to interpret the subtle signs of the forest. By the fourth week, our eyes were sharper, finely tuned to detect not only fresh tracks, but also patterns of broken branches, unusual marks on tree bark, or even a faint, earthy, sweet smell that sometimes mingled with the scent of moss and rain. It was during my turn on the Central Front, early that fourth week, when something broke the monotony. It wasn't a sighting, but a sound. I was checking a trail camera, the light rain drumming on my jacket hood, when I heard it. A deep, resonant vocalization, different from any deer bellow I had ever studied. It wasn't a roar, nor a mournful cry, but something more akin to a deep, almost human moan, albeit distorted, as if coming from a throat not meant to produce such sounds. It repeated 3 times, spaced by tense silences. It wasn't close. The echo suggested it came from the depths of the valley, beyond the area we had extensively mapped. I recorded what little I could with my handheld recorder and sent the audio to Andres and Sophia via radio that same night. The feedback was immediate. Both were as bewildered as I was. "It sounds wrong," Andres commented, his voice unusually sober. Sophia suggested it might be a reverberation phenomenon or some other species. But the guttural melody of that sound had stuck with me, and I knew it wasn't the echo of a puma or the lowing of a distant cow. Upon reviewing the recording time, a chill ran down my spine. The sound had occurred right at twilight, a time not very common for large cervid activity, which tends to be diurnal or more nocturnal in the late hours of the night. I mentioned it to my companions. I want to camp there, or at least be present, right at dusk. Maybe then I can get a sighting, an indication of what on earth produces that sound. It's too risky to go alone. The deeper zones can be unpredictable, Andres told me. We can't abandon our fronts now. The humal distribution is extensive, and if they start moving, we could lose weeks of work, Sophia replied. They understood, but they couldn't risk the monitoring. I insisted, the urgency growing within me, so I decided to ask one of the local guides for help. The man, with a weathered face and eyes that always seemed distant, listened to me with his usual silence until I finished. Then, his response was a resounding and surprising no. His refusal wasn't due to laziness. It was a categorical denial. He looked at me with an inscrutable expression, a mix of warning and fear. "It's reckless, miss. There are things you don't look for in the darkness of that forest." His refusal was so sudden and suspicious that it chilled me, but I couldn't force him. It wasn't his obligation to risk his life for my scientific intuitions. I knew that what I was about to do was a risk, a violation of safety protocols. But curiosity, the longing to unravel that mystery stirring in the depths of the forest, was stronger than caution. The recording of that guttural moan echoed in my mind. I had to go. My backpack felt heavy, but it was a welcome burden compared to the mental weight of the bees. I advanced with determination toward the section of the Central Front where I had recorded that sound. The ascent was slow, the humidity and moss making every step slippery. I reached the point I had marked on the GPS just as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky with oranges and purples through the dense tree canopy. The air grew colder and the silence deeper. I set up my small camouflage tent as discreetly as possible among the foliage and lit a tiny campfire to warm a portion of food. I watched the sunset, every shadow lengthening and shifting. The forest grew dark. Hours passed, and the only signs of life were the bats that began to zigzag in the twilight sky and the myriads of insects that, relentlessly, swarmed towards the light of my headlamp. Frustration began to take hold. Nothing, not a single sighting of the South American deer. The moan that had drawn me there did not repeat. My spirits fell. Perhaps my hunch was just the desperate desire of an exhausted biologist to find something out of the ordinary. It was already late at night, and the cold was beginning to seep in. I decided to end the vigil and get into the tent. If they were nocturnal, they would have to be so in the deepest hours of the night, and my goal was only to confirm the possibility, not to freeze in the attempt. I crawled into the tent, adjusted my sleeping bag, and closed my eyes, exhaustion claiming its toll. Just as consciousness began to fade, a sound startled me. It was the moan, that deep, resonant vocalization, identical to the one I had recorded, that had brought me here. Had I dreamed it? Half asleep, I opened my eyes, my heart racing. I thought it was the echo of my own subconscious desire, manifesting in a vivid dream. I sat up, turned on my flashlight, and poked my head out of the tent zipper. The night was dark and silent. The flames of my campfire, reduced to embers, cast a faint, dancing light on the nearby trees. There was nothing, only shadows and the wind whispering through the leaves. With a sigh of resignation, I re-entered the tent, convinced it had been an illusion. I was about to fall asleep again when a presence enveloped me. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling of being watched. My skin crawled. It was outside, a large animal, no doubt. But the flickering light from the campfire embers, casting shadows on one side of my tent, formed a silhouette, and it wasn't that of a deer nor a puma. It was tall and upright, unmistakably human. Had someone managed to reach this inaccessible place? Other researchers? Poachers? The silhouette moved, and an icy chill ran down my spine. The figure sat down in my folding chair, which I had left by the campfire. Then, I heard the subtle rustle of leaves and broken branches. Another person was walking around my tent, slowly circling me. I was trapped. 2 intruders, perhaps more. My knife, a modest multi-tool, felt ridiculous in my trembling hand. I had a roll of survival rope, but what good would it be? Fear tightened my throat. My mind raced, searching for a plan, as the sound of cautious footsteps approached the entrance to my tent. One of the figures stopped in front of the zipper, darkness engulfing its form, but I felt its proximity, its breath. And then I heard a sniff, an unmistakable animal sound, rhythmic and wet, just on the other side of the fabric. It wasn't a dog's sniff. It was something deeper, more intense. A person doing that? I remained mute, frozen, my heart pounding against my ribs. Suddenly, the figures moved away, not running, but retreating with movements that, even in the dim light, seemed strangely coordinated and silent. I took advantage of the distance to peek out of the zipper, flashlight in hand, looking for a clear view. The faint light of the campfire still glowed, and against the deep darkness of the forest, I saw their silhouettes. They were tall, slender, but when one of them turned slightly, the campfire light hit the outline of its head, and I saw with horror some ears, not human, but animal, moving. Large and pointed, they twitched, the same movement a dog or a deer makes to catch a sound. It was impossible. My eyes tried to register the shape of their bodies, which were longer than normal, their limbs too skeletal. I understood nothing. Terror overwhelmed me. Instinctively, driven by an irrational panic, I started to make noise. I stomped on the tent floor, shuffled my feet, banged on the tent fabric. A part of me believed the noise would scare them away, that the surprise of a confrontation would make them retreat. And it worked. I heard footsteps rapidly moving away, but there weren't 2. There were 4, perhaps 5, or more, a trail of quick movements that vanished into the depths of the forest. I poked my head out of the tent, shining my flashlight. The light cut through the darkness, but only revealed the disturbance of bushes and branches swaying, as if something large and fast had passed through. No way was I going to follow them. What were they? Humans? Animals? The hours until dawn loomed over me like an eternity. I stayed in the tent, flashlight on, knife firmly gripped, praying nothing else would happen that night. The Patagonian cold had never felt so absolute. The night stretched on, a silent, cold torture. Every rustle in the forest, Every raindrop falling on the tent was magnified in the terrifying silence. My mind replayed the image of those tall silhouettes, the twitching ears, the animal sniff over and over. What on earth had I witnessed? At that moment, I didn't know if I was going crazy or if. I didn't know what we would have to live through that very week. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.